Welcome to our new series of programs on the False Friends of Fatima. My name is Richard Lehrberger, and once again I am filling in for Father Nicholas Gruner. In case you have missed some of the earlier episodes, Christopher Ferrara and I have been talking about some truly unbelievable, astounding material about what's going on in the church here in the latter half of the 20th century and into this one. We've seen, for instance, balloon masses. We've seen witch doctors in Assisi, Italy with the Pope. We've seen Hindus in the Capellina on the very site where Our Lady appeared to the three children back in 1917. And Christopher Ferrara is back with us once again to discuss his book, False Friends of Fatima. Chris, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Richard. And False Friends of Fatima indeed is the theme of the book. The chaos we're seeing in the church today, and the current Pope, Benedict XVI, has lamented the state of the church, talking about a loss of faith, as did his predecessor, John Paul II, who spoke of a silent apostasy in Europe. These popes have remarked a situation in the church that doesn't have any precedence in the prior history of the church. Maybe perhaps the Arian heresy in the 4th century is comparable in scope to what is going on now. And the False Friends of Fatima are a part of that, because Our Lady came to Fatima in 1917 to give us a prescription for this coming chaos in the church, which she foresaw. Obviously, that's what the third secret must be about. And that prescription is consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart, to my Immaculate Heart, so that Russia will convert, because Russia would be in a matter of weeks from the apparitions, Russia would become the source of errors that would spread throughout the world. The communist revolution, which would spill over into China and Korea and throughout Southeast Asia. The errors of Russia, legalized abortion, postcard divorce, the collapse of morality, that would spread throughout the Western world. That prescription would apply to the church as well, because these errors would penetrate the church after the Second Vatican Council. The influence of Freemasonry is something that we have discussed. The idea would be to remake churchmen from conservative defenders of the gospel into liberal, open-minded people. They don't have to become communists necessarily, or even actual members of the Masonic fraternity. All that is necessary is to turn churchmen into liberals, who would be au courant with the modern way of thinking, and would accommodate themselves to things like balloon masses and witch doctors at Assisi, and Hindus in the Capellina. Unbelievable things that we've seen. And these false friends of Fatima are promoting a new Fatima. That's in keeping with all of this novelty and craziness in the church. And the new Fatima is the new updated Fatima. Oh no, no more conversion of Russia. No, Russia will just become more open and democratic. No more triumph of the Immaculate Heart. We don't want to see any kind of Catholic civilization return. No, everything we see in the status quo is perfectly acceptable. Just give the Catholic Church her little place in the public square alongside all the lunatics. We'll just have our little booth over in the corner there, and if you'd like to be a Catholic, well, you can be a Catholic. That's all the Masons ever wanted. Let the church surrender her claim to be the source of social order, not just private belief, but social order. So these false friends are precipitating this change of orientation within the context of the message of Fatima, and we've been exploring the role of the Secretary of State in imposing a party line on Fatima. We have to have a new Fatima for the new orientation of the church. And one thing we could discuss today is this analog in the context of the new Fatima between not only a party line that you have to adopt, 2 + 2 is 5, conversion isn't really conversion, but also organs that propagate the party line. So just as we saw in Stalinist Russia, a Pravda, a newspaper named Truth, which gives you the opposite of the truth, well, we're seeing a Pravda in the new church for the new orientation. And this Pravda preaches the new message of Fatima. One example of that Pravda that I cover in chapter 9 has been, unfortunately, a Catholic newspaper called The Wanderer.
Seems to be an apropos title.
It's wandered from the truth. And it's an interesting story about this newspaper. There was a split between two cousins, Alphonse Matt and Walter Matt, right around the time all the changes in the church began, around 1967. Alphonse Matt wanted to go along with the changes and defend them as somehow consistent with tradition. The new Mass, the new ecumenism, which has blossomed into all of this craziness we see. But his cousin, Walter Matt said, I can't go along with this. This is madness. You can't abolish the traditional Latin Mass and replace it with a new Mass. And as we know, Pope Benedict said that in reality, the traditional Mass never was abolished. So Walter
Even though
said,
it was given the appearance that it had been.
right. And that's why we have balloon masses now, because of the liturgical revolution in the church. So Walter said to Al, I can't go along with this. I'm starting my own newspaper, The Remnant, aptly titled, because it would turn out that only a minority of Catholics would hold on to the old ways. And I've been a writer for The Remnant. Well, the Wanderer has to attack Fatima if it's going to sign on to the new orientation in the church. And that means, in particular, it would have to attack those who defend Fatima in its traditional sense. And chief among those, of course, would be Father Nicholas Gruner. So in chapter 9 of my book, I talk about an attack on Father Gruner in The Wanderer in 2001, right around the time that the vision of the third secret had been revealed. In one of the earlier episodes, we discussed that, how the new Fatima was furthered by a new interpretation of Fatima, embracing basically a view of Fatima as consigned to the past. It was basically reduced to 20th century events. The consecration's been done without mentioning Russia, because we can't offend Russia. And we have a conversion which consists of democracy, consumerism, and so forth, and pluralism. Well, the new Fatima has to be promoted by attacking those who defend the old Fatima. So in The Wanderer in 2001, we see an attack on Father Gruner, written by Farley Clinton, who I know. I've met Farley. We've had conversations in Rome and elsewhere. And Farley Clinton's article on Father Gruner is entitled The Strange Case of Father Gruner.
This Farley Clinton actually attended one of the peace conferences
That's right.
that the Fatima Center held over in Europe.
That's where I met him in Rome. And according to Farley Clinton in this article, and I'm quoting, there seems to be the suggestion, meaning in Father Gruner's literature, that we may be seeing the last days described in the Apocalypse at the time when a third of the stars of heaven, the bishops, some commentators think, are dragged down by the tail of the dragon, end quote. Well, he ridicules that. I'm not here to say these are the last days, but you can have an apocalyptic scenario before you get to the end of the world. There have been many times in the history of the church when there have been apocalyptic developments which anticipate what will come at the end of the world. But he ridicules the idea that a third of the stars of heaven are being dragged down by the tail of the dragon.
If I can interject here for a moment, he's attributing, Clinton that is attributing those words to Father Gruner. But in reality, it was somebody else who spoke those words.
Exactly so. Maybe in his confusion, he didn't recognize that this image of the tail of the dragon dragging a third of the stars down from heaven was brought to the attention of the faithful at Fatima in 2000 by Pope John Paul II. So Mr. Clinton, and by extension the Wanderer, are ridiculing the warning of John Paul II at Fatima. Now, when he was at Fatima in 2000, this is where we began this series, he was at Fatima to reveal, or to announce the revelation in June of the vision pertaining to the third secret. And that was announced for us by the Cardinal Secretary of State. At Fatima on that occasion, John Paul II gave a homily warning about the tail of the dragon, which is a clear reference to the book of the Apocalypse, chapter 12. But Sodano, Cardinal Sodano, got up to say we're going to be publishing the third secret, but only the vision, not the other part, in several weeks. So Antonio Socci has a theory about this strange confluence of events. You have Cardinal Sodano saying we're about to publish part of the third secret, which he represented is the entire third secret. But then you have John Paul II getting up and talking about the tail of the dragon, sweeping a third of the stars of heaven, traditionally understood to be consecrated souls, priests, bishops, and religious, sweeping those stars down from heaven. They fall from their exalted, consecrated state into scandal. Of course, by then, the pedophile scandal was breaking. John Paul II was linking the book of the Apocalypse, says Antonio Socci, to the third secret of Fatima.
And he's warning us, the Pope, to have nothing to do with these third of the stars.
And Sochi is saying, well, this is a compromise that was worked out in the Vatican. The Pope would be allowed to intimate that the third secret pertains to the book of the Apocalypse and relates to apocalyptic developments. But only the vision would be published. So this text by which the Virgin herself would say what John Paul II is saying, only more explicitly, would be suppressed. But we'll let John Paul II leak a part of the contents of that secret. And this would be what Sochi calls the compromise solution. So that the Vatican could say later on, well, we've revealed the third secret. After all, John Paul II mentioned the tail of the dragon, the fall of consecrated souls from heaven. So what Farley Clinton is ridiculing as if it came from the mouth of Father Gruner actually came from the mouth of the Pope, which shows that he's really not informed on this subject, and neither is the Wanderer.
I just want to make one comment here. The Vatican hierarchy, and maybe even the Pope included, though there's no way to know the mind of the late Pope, they might have thought that they had disclosure through this whatever mental reservation or compromise they might have come up with. But there's only one real problem with that. How many people actually know that that's what they intended, if in fact that's what they intended?
Yeah. Sochi speaks of a mental reservation regarding the text of the third secret of Fatima. And now the false friends of Fatima, cooperating with the Vatican Secretary of State, have said, well, the vision of the bishop dressed in white being executed on a hill outside a ruined city, well, that's all there is to the vision. But then they ask us to believe that since we don't know what this vision really means, well, we have to have Cardinal Sodano interpret it for us, which is ridiculous. The Mother of God did not come to Fatima to place us into the tender care of the Secretary of State, the same Secretary of State who at the time was covering up the scandal with Father Maciel.
Right.
It's an outrage. So clearly there's a text that would explain the vision that was published in 2000, but there's a mental reservation, says Sochi. And I agree with his theory. The mental reservation is this. Well, maybe this text that goes along with the vision is just Sister Lucy's idea. Maybe it's just some thoughts that she had which she attributed to the Virgin Mary. And we really can't be sure it's authentic. We're not sure, so we really don't want to publish this text. But maybe the Pope thinks that there's something to it, so we'll let him intimate what the text would convey.
I see the reasoning.
A crisis in the church leading up to the scenario where the Pope is executed on the hill. But we'll get the Pope to go along with us, and the Pope will say, okay, maybe we're not entirely sure, but let me leak it to the extent of saying that the third secret, which we are about to publish, relates to an apocalyptic scenario, a crisis in the church. And that's what Our Lady does say in the part of the third secret that was in Sister Lucia's fourth memoir, where she speaks of a crisis of dogma when she says, in Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, ... Well, what's the rest of that? So by a mental reservation, they could persuade themselves that they're telling us the truth.
I see.
Now, in his article in The Wanderer, Mr. Clinton reveals his thoughts about his attendance at a Fatima conference in Rome, where I met him. And he writes in The Wanderer, I spent 3 or 4 days with the inner circle of his, meaning Father Gruner's, pious associates.
That sounds...
Well, that's a snide remark. I mean, there is no inner circle of pious associates.
Sounds rather cultish.
Yeah, he's trying to portray Father Gruner's organization as a cult. I'm a civil attorney. I practice in civil courts, federal and state courts throughout the United States of America. I'm a published author. I write for numerous publications. I'm not the member of any cult. Father Gruner's organization is no cult. But that's how Pravda works. When the party wants to declare somebody an unperson, one of the techniques they use is to suggest that this person is a nut. You shouldn't believe him. He's a lunatic. He's crazy. Why?
And they use clever language to insinuate.
Right. Yeah. And how do we know he's crazy? Well, he's a cult member. And the leader of the cult is crazy too. All of these people are non-persons that no one should listen to. Why? Because they don't follow the party line. They won't say that 2 + 2 is 5. In other words, we'll call them crazy because they're not crazy. The lunatics are running the asylum. So when the lunatics are running the asylum, they have to say that those who aren't lunatics are crazy. Otherwise, people might wake up to the fact that, hey, wait a minute, this is a lunatic asylum. The church has become, humanly speaking, a lunatic asylum. Bishops are participating in balloon masses. They're walking around holding balloons during Mass. But they're not crazy. No, no. They're following the party line. The people who object to this, they must be crazy. And that's what's going on here with the Wanderer. Father Gruner's crazy. Why? Because he's a traditional Catholic priest who wears a cassock, who celebrates the traditional Mass, and actually believes that when Our Lady said Russia will be converted, she meant Russia will become Catholic. Imagine that.
Yeah.
I mean, how can we have that sort of thing going on when the serious business of the day, including balloon masses, must proceed? So obviously Father Gruner must be crazy. And then Clinton goes on to say that I know he, meaning Father Gruner, is supposed to have an obsession with the visions of Fatima. So you see, Father Gruner is obsessed. He's crazy. He must be the victim of some kind of pathological obsession, because he actually thinks that Our Lady came to call for the conversion of Russia. Ha 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 ha. Isn't that funny, ladies and gentlemen?
Absolutely. I mean, clearly, by saying he's obsessed means he's not rational.
Right. That's a familiar tactic of the communist regime and the left wing in America, by the way. My opponent is a lunatic. Meanwhile, the lunatics, as I say, are running the asylum. And then Clinton goes on to say in this same article, Father Gruner seems to be the only expert on Fatima. On a scale of respectability, from 1 to 10, he is about a 2. Now, is this serious Catholic journalism? This is the catty remark of someone who really doesn't know anything about the subject. Farley Clinton knows very little about the message of Fatima. I had a conversation with him in Rome about the consecration of Russia. And he said, oh, come on, Chris, what difference does it make whether they mention Russia or not? And I said to him, well, Farley, if it makes no difference, why haven't they mentioned Russia?
It's an excellent point.
He was stunned. He didn't have a word to say. I hadn't thought of that. The reason they haven't mentioned Russia is because mentioning Russia does make a difference. If it made no difference to them, they would have mentioned Russia. Duh. So Farley says that Father Gruner, on a scale of respectability from 1 to 10, is about a 2. Well, this is another tactic. He's not respectable. Let's not discuss the merits of the issue. The merits of the issue are simply these. Our Lady came to call for the consecration of Russia, which means the conversion of Russia, which means the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, not the world like we see it today. Our Lady didn't come to say, in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph and the status quo will prevail. No, my Immaculate Heart will triumph means miraculous transformation of the world, like in Mexico, when she appeared on that hill in Tepeyac in the 1500s, and an entire nation in the space of 7 years converted from pagan sacrifice to Catholicism in an instant. That's what she came to talk about. Well, how do you discredit someone who's preaching common sense? That conversion means conversion. You say he's not respectable.
So far, Clinton has said that Father Gruner is the leader of a cult,
right,
who's obsessed,
right,
and that he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Well, he doesn't even get into that. He says he's the leader of a cult, he's obsessed, and hey, he's not respectable. That's the argumentum ad hominem. Don't believe anything he says about the message of Fatima because, well, he's a no-good-nick.
So it's the same thing we're seeing with Father Fox. It's just sort of repackaged and it's being put out in a newspaper article.
Father Fox's big line before he passed away against Father Gruner was, "Who is your bishop?" Well, Father Gruner has a bishop. He's incarnated in an archdiocese. That issue has been laid to rest. But that's how they attack somebody when they can't attack him on the merits. Oh, he doesn't have the right credentials. He's not respectable enough. He's crazy. He's a lunatic. He's the head of a cult. And then everyone forgets what the real issue is, which is that they have made a mockery of the message of Fatima. So he goes on to say in the same article, the complaint that Father Gruner filed with the Pope sets out a good deal of the history of Father Gruner's strange quarrels with the hierarchy and the Holy See. What does that mean?
What is strange? Yeah.
Here is Father Gruner's strange quarrel with the hierarchy and the Holy See. The Church is in a state of chaos. Even the Pope recognizes this. Even John Paul II speaks of silent apostasy in the Church. Father Gruner's quarrel is not with the hierarchy. Father Gruner's quarrel is with certain Vatican bureaucrats who were trying to shut down his apostolate in the early to mid-90s, during the pontificate of Pope Benedict, they seem to have backed off from this. This is almost as if they're exhausted trying to shut him up because they can't. The truth will out. And he's a messenger of the truth. So these strange quarrels are simply along the lines of, hey, the church is falling to pieces, humanly speaking. The wheels have come off the train. You want to put the wheels back on the train? Do what Our Lady said. Consecrate Russia. Get the train back on its track toward the destiny of the church in the world, which is to make disciples of all nations. You folks have abandoned your mission. You're running around with balloons at Mass and inviting Hindus to the Capellina, into religious gatherings. Meanwhile, Catholics have lost the faith. Hello? They don't believe anything that the church teaches anymore unless it suits their personal preferences.
But apparently people losing their faith isn't nearly as important as ecumenical dialogue or politics with communist nations.
Well, when the church is dominated by a party line, the faith no longer matters. The truth no longer matters. What matters is your credentials. Hey, are you willing to say 2 + 2 = 5? Oh, okay, great. Here's your stamp of approval. You just said 2 + 2 is 5. You're okay with us. You can function within the party apparatus. There's actually a parallel church going on. You can't destroy the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is surviving this crisis, even though there's all kinds of disturbances within the commonwealth of the church, the human structure.
We have our Lord's assurance that the gates of hell will not prevail against the Catholic Church.
Right, and for example, the traditional Latin Mass has never gone away. And in 2007, July 7, 07, a very significant date, Pope Benedict XVI in his motu proprio Summorum Pontificum said not only that the new Mass was never abrogated, but that people must have access to it once again all over the world. Now, if we're going to talk about a revolution in the church, that's a counter-revolution. We're not saying that Pope Benedict XVI has completely restored the church. There are huge problems remaining. But that's the first step on the road to restoration, getting the liturgy back, because that's where the rubber of the faith meets the road. People believe as they pray. If you change the way they pray, you're going to change the way they believe. If you replace a traditional Mass with a balloon Mass, you're going to get balloon-headed Catholics. It's that simple. That's why people don't believe anymore, because they're not taught the faith when they go to church. That's where they practice their faith, on Sunday. If they get palaver and ridiculous music and sacrilegious worship and communion in the hand, everything they think about the faith is going to change through the way they worship on Sunday. So we've had some beginnings of a restoration, but there's a long way to go. But the wanderer doesn't see this, you see, because the wanderer is the pravda of the new religion. So they have to attack people like Father Gruner. And this is what Clinton says further on in this same article. What really disturbs me, says Farley Clinton, is that Father Gruner's writing seems to imply that the Pope ought to choose Father Gruner as his personal confessor, and if the Pope does not, he cannot fulfill his most essential duty. This is never said, writes Clinton, yet it is hard to draw any other conclusion. What? Where does Father Gruner say, when has he ever said he should be the Pope's confessor?
The first thing that comes to my mind is seems to imply.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, this is how a demagogue works. He really doesn't have any evidence. He's trying to create negative impressions in the minds of the reader. It's a strategy of boo, hiss, what a bad character this is. But you really don't have any ammunition. You have no facts at your disposal. So you create the impression that he's an egomaniac, a lunatic, the leader of a cult. So Father Gruner never actually says he should be the Pope's confessor, but it's hard.
He seems to imply.
He seems to imply that. Well, seems to imply, well, that's a twofold equivocation. Seems means only apparently, not really. And imply means you're not actually stating it, you're suggesting it. So he might be stating that he implies something. It's twice removed, it's utter nonsense. And it's a calumny. Father Gruner has never said anything of the kind. I discussed that with Father Gruner, this allegation of Clinton's that he wants to be the Pope's confessor, and Father Gruner said, are you kidding? Who would want that responsibility? He doesn't want to be the Pope's confessor. He wants the Pope to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. That's a pretty simple request, and I think he has the right to make that request.
As do we all.
And then the Wanderer goes on in this article and elsewhere to suggest that Father Gruner doesn't have the proper credentials, that he doesn't have the proper canonical status. And this is all along the lines of avoiding the merits, as we've said throughout this episode, while just casting aspersions on the person who brings the unwelcome news. Well, forget the messenger. Don't listen to what he says, because he doesn't have the party's seal of approval. He doesn't have the right credentials. Even though actually, strictly speaking, he does. He is incardinated in a diocese. But that's the whole idea behind the pravda of the party line. Promote the party line by promoting the idea that the old way of thinking is outmoded, and those who advance the new way of thinking, they're non-persons. And that's been the function of the Wanderer in this controversy. There's more about that in the book, but...
Does Clinton have anything else to say, or was that the end of his piece?
Well, Clinton's piece is all along the same lines, but you get the picture, and the details are in the book. The idea is character assassination. You know, the Secretary of State imposes his party line, and then these faithful party workers below assassinate the character of those who dissent from the party line. It's the old Soviet story applied to the Catholic Church.
Sure, sure. Well, I see we're beginning to run out of time here. Just want to go ahead and remind everyone here, as Father Gruner says, pray the Rosary every day. Once again, we thank you very much for joining us. I hope that this information is compelling and that you're learning something and that you understand what's being done to you with these false friends of Fatima in teaching you to learn a false version of what Our Lady had to say. Thank you very much for being here. God bless you, and we hope to see you next time.